Now we're actually ready to start drawing in Vectorworks. So what we're going to be generating first is something that we call a title block. Title block is an integral part of the drawing. It is a label that goes onto every page of drafting that you do, and it gives important information such as the title of the drafting, title of the show, the page number, the scale, and your contact information, things like that. So it's a very important thing. We want to change our layer scale to start. So we want to generate the title block in something called one-to-one scale. And what one-to-one scale is, it means for every inch on paper, it's a real inch. Vectorworks by default, with a new blank document, puts our pages into quarter-inch scale. So a quarter of an inch on paper or in the virtual space equals a foot in real life. So we're going to change that. We're going to click where it says layer scale. And over in metric engineering, we're going to click 1-to-1 and hit OK. And you can see that our rulers and everything like that have now changed as well in order to indicate that we're now operating in a different scale. Next thing we want to do is set up some default attributes with just the selection tool, the arrow on, and no object selected in your workspace at all. Any changes you make to the attributes panel will become your defaults. So we want to select our default fill to be solid and white with 100% opacity, our pen to be solid and black with 100% opacity, and we want to change our line thickness to 0.25. The other thing to check real quick before we get started is down in snapping. We want all of our snapping to be turned on except snap to grid. So snapping, like we talked about before, helps you align objects to other objects. Snap to grid has its uses. The grid being this blue, like grid paper-ish pattern that's everywhere. You can change the size of the grid. You can use snap to grid in certain situations to really benefit you and your drawing. This is not one of those cases, so we're just going to leave it off. So we're going to be using this title block JPEG image that is up on web courses as well, and we're going to be replicating this title block. First thing we want to do is establish this outside largest rectangle, which is 1 3/4 inches by 1 foot. So I'm going to select the rectangle tool. Now, the way the rectangle tool works in this particular mode, which is called corner to corner, is I'm going to click a starting point, and then I'm going to pull my mouse away. I'm not clicking and holding my mouse button. I clicked once, and now I'm just moving my mouse over. And you can see that that starts establishing a rectangle. When I click the second time, it's going to fully form that rectangle and fill it in. Another way we can draw with this is I'm going to click start, and you see the changing X and Y numbers that are right by my cursor. Those are adjustable. So I can actually hit Tab, and now that field is able to be edited. So I'm going to put in 1 3/4 inches, which I can do one of two ways. I can either type 1.75, which is the decimal equivalent of 3/4, or I can type 1 space 3/4. And now, because of the default preferences we have selected, Vectorworks will default to any number that we enter being an inch or in inches. So 1 3/4 is going to interpret as 1 3/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to hit Tab now. You'll see that it fills in that quotation, fills in the quotation without me having to add it in myself. And now we need to put in the 1 foot for the height. So X is the width, Y is the height. So 1 apostrophe. You can include the 0 if you would like. You don't have to. I'm going to hit the Enter key. And now I'm going to hit enter again, and it's going to form that rectangle. One last way to do this, I'm going to delete it and show you one other method. If you double click on the rectangle tool in your basic tool palette, you're going to get a create object dialog that comes up. From here, we can actually edit, input right away the width and the height. So I'm going to select the width. I'm going to change that to 1 3/4 inches. I hit tab to go down to height, and this is going to be 1 foot. Now, before I hit OK, I'm going to point out this section of the Create Object dialog. We have 9 circles, and then we have a checkbox that's selected Position at Next Click. These box positions is what Vectorworks calls it, but these 9 circles will dictate where this rectangle is going to be drawn from my cursor. So I'm going to click the top leftmost circle to illustrate this. I'm going to say OK. And you can see that now this box, this rectangle, is following my cursor going to the right and to the bottom, as if my cursor is that top left point. And now if I click, it'll be in relationship to that. I'm going to hit Control Z. It'd be Command Z, undo. Now I'm going to do this again, double click on rectangle. You'll notice that it holds on to the width and the height that I last inputted into this create object dialog. So that's also a handy thing to note. I'm going to click the center box position. I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to line that up with my origin point and hit enter. So now I have this 1 3/4 inch by 1 foot box in my drawing. We actually want this line thickness to be a little thicker for this outside. That's because we really want the title block to stand out when it's on the page. So we're going to go to line thickness, and we're going to up it to 0.7. So much thicker line now. The next box we're going to be creating is this bottom plate box. We're just going to be working our way up the title block. So I'm going to grab the rectangle tool again. And we want this one to be 1 3/4 inches by 2 1/8 inch. So as I hover my mouse over top of this bottom left corner of the main box, you can see how it turned red. This is a smart cursor setting. It's letting us know that if we were to click right here, we're going to be perfectly aligned and snap to that bottom left corner, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to click once. I'm going to pull over, and this is where we see the power of snapping. Once I get close to the opposite side, you can see it just kind of snaps into place against that line. So it's grabbing that 1 3/4 inch horizontal for us. So we just need to change the Y value. So I'm going to hit tab, 2 space 1/8 and hit enter. I'm going to hit enter again. This is where having no fill is going to be particularly useful. If I have fill turned on these interior rectangles, you can see how it's going to start overlapping and cutting into that thicker outside border, which is just kind of like a weird and kind of messy look to it. So I am going to turn off its fill, and I'm going to, with no tool selected, I'm going to disable fill. I'm going to click the fill style to none as well. And we're just going to keep working with no fill for now. Next, we want to draw this 1 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch date box. I'm going to double click on my rectangle tool and do it this way. 1 3/4, set height to 3/4 inch. And I'm going to select the bottom left box position in order to take full advantage of snapping. I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to let my cursor snap to the top left of the rectangle I just drew and click it into place. Now the box right above it is the exact same size. The scale box we can see is the exact same size. What we could do is double click that rectangle tool again. It saves our same measurements, hit OK, snap, and click into place. Or the other tool, or command rather, to get used to is duplication. We're going to use duplicate a lot. It comes into handy quite often when you're drafting. So you're going to go up to Edit and Duplicate. And it's going to create an identical box and it's going to offset it. When you get close to one of the corners, you'll see that it glows red and you end up with the compass-y look that tells you you can move it. So you want to click and hold and drag over. And then once you're snapped to one of the corners of the other box, you're going to release. And it's all perfectly lined up again. Next box, 1 3/4 inches by 1 3/8. Just use your favorite method. I'm going to use the tab. And I'm just going to tab over to the Y value right off the bat. I'm going to hit tab again, and I'm going to lock it into place. Next box we want to make, or it's probably easiest to make, is going to be this top one for the Theater UCF logo. So that one is 1 3/4 inches by 2 inches. I'm going to use the double click. In this case, I'm going to make it 2 inches, and I'm going to select one of the top box positions, in this case, the top left for me. Let's snap to the top left of my outer rectangle and click to lock it into place. And now for show title and plate title. Show title we can look at and is 1 inch wide by 5 inches. Again, pick your favorite method. Actually, I'll show you the click and drag one in this case with tab. So previously we've been working with tab only in a positive direction. Just as a reminder, to the right and up is positive measurements, and to the left and downwards in this workspace is negative measurements. So in order to get us what we need, I'm going to say X is 1 inch, and then Y we actually want to be -5 inches. If I was to cycle back around and say 5 inches, it's going to actually push it upwards, which is not very handy to us. So we're going to say -5 and enter, lock into place. Now we do have this divider already set, right? We don't need necessarily another rectangle in this space over here. Why it's useful to go ahead and draw one is because of snapping. We get this center snap point when we have a rectangle. You can see as I'm hovering over in that plate title gap area, I'm not getting that snapping point. So we're just going to go ahead and make a rectangle to fill that gap. Rectangle, in this case, super easy. I'm just going to connect one corner and drag down, snap to the other corner, click, and we're done. Next, we want to start dealing with the text that we need. So I'm going to go up to the text tool, which is this letter T, or it's the short key 1. I'm going to click over to the side, and with my caps lock on, I'm going to type show title. Now, if you're getting into shortcut keys and you were to try to hit X in order to get back to your selection tool, you'll see that it actually types the letter X in this case. That's not what we want. So you can either hit the Enter key, not return. Return is going to add a line, like if you're returning in a Word document. I'm going to hit delete once. You can either hit Enter or you can hit Escape, and it will close out that text box. And then at this point, you can easily select your selection tool again via X, or you can always click on it. I want to set this text to be probably pretty big, so I'm going to go ahead and set it to 48 to start. And we want it to obviously travel vertically along this box. So I'm going to go into rotation, and change it to 90. The other thing we want to do is change its horizontal and vertical alignment. So you could see when I did the rotation 90, it worked off of this top left corner because we have vertical alignment top and horizontal alignment left. So it added what's called an insertion point into the text box. So that's where the text is coming from, is that top and left because of these alignment points. I, just for ease and simplicity and for snapping purposes, we want this to be center and center. And now if I hit rotate 90, it's going to rotate along that insertion point still, but this time because it's in the center, it just rotates around itself a bit more. I'm going to click and hold where on the insertion point, and I'm going to click and drag it over to snap to the center of that box, and I'm going to release. So super quick way to align something in the center of another thing. Because this has the correct alignment and positioning and rotation kind of deal, I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this using Control D, Command D. I'm going to scale this down for the plate title. Click and hold on the insertion point and drag over to center. If you need help lining it up, just drag it over to the side and then drag it back in. And then I'm going to double click on the text and it's going to immediately put me into a text edit. I'll just select show title, type plate. Now I'm going to hit enter key to close that. And then X to get my selection tool back. Next, we're going to do the designer name contact information one. So text tool again, or the number 1. And I'm going to type designer, return. You're going to type your name. I'm typing mine. And then I always find it's good to have another point of contact for people besides your name. Just your name will suffice if that's what you would like. Now I'm going to change alignment to center and center. And I'm going to scale this up to be 18 point instead. I'm going to click and drag it over. And you can see it actually got a little too big, so I'm just going to drop that down. You can hit set size if you would like, and I'm going to try it at 16, and that's a little closer. Not quite what I want. I'm going to bring it down to 15, just so everything fits a little bit better. I'm going to duplicate that box, click and drag it down to center, and I'm going to re-edit this for my scale. So I'm going to select all, scale, return, and you want to convert your scale to be whatever scale your page is in when you go to print. Half-inch scale is very typical for what we do, so I'm just going to put that as my default. And I'm going to duplicate this text box again, click and drag it into alignment, and I'm going to make this my drawn and date. You want to insert the date that you're drawing the drawing on. Next, we're going to tackle this plate number. So the plate is the label. The big one in the center is the current plate. It's the page of the drafting that this title block is actually located on. And then the of one you want to change to be of however many pages are in the packet that you're submitting. So in this case, we're just going to keep it as 1. I am going to do text tool off of the side and just hit 1. And I'm going to scale it up to be something like 72. That feels about right. And then I'm going to do another one for plate. Another one that says of 1. So now to get these into alignment, we could just drag it into place and hope for the best. Maybe that's close, maybe it's not. visually it's pretty close. If we wanted it to be exact, we can take advantage of snapping again. So I'm going to click and drag and hold over top until I get the center point of my big plate number 1 to turn red. Then I'm just going to start going straight up from there. And you can see how it forms this green dashed line right above it with that center point still highlighted in red. So that's telling us that this green line is perfectly centered with that center point of the number 1. So we're perfectly snapped to this. We're perfectly in line. And I'm just going to place it someplace vertically that feels appropriate. Same thing with number 1. I'm going to bring it down and line it up where it feels right. And with both of those, I'm going to make sure their horizontal alignment and vertical alignment are center. And I'm going to scale them up a little bit just for visibility. At any point when you're drawing around, you can press and hold spacebar, click and drag, and I'll use the hand tool. The other thing I like to do is either fit to page area, sort of a pseudo default home button, or if I'm just drawing one thing, I can do fit to objects, and it's going to zoom me right back into the thing that I'm working on or the thing that I have selected within a larger drawing. Last thing we need to do is grab our Theater UCF logo. You can also get that off of web courses. In this case, we're going to go to File, Import, and Import Image File. You're going to navigate to where you have your title blocks or your Theater UCF logo saved. I'm going to hit OK. When you're importing images, you have a ton of different options. In this case, we can leave everything the default. It's not going to do anything, but just know that these options are things to take advantage of at certain points and to learn what they do. Hit OK. All right, so it came in quite big. We know that this square is 1 3/4 inches by 2 inches. So we can sort of start to approximate how big it is that we actually need to make this. So the couple things we could do. We can click on the bottom corner and we can start dragging it in. Now, if we just drag it in, you can see we can also do what's called reconstraining it. So we can change actually the proportion of the image, which isn't something that looks great. It got a little squished. That's not a lot of fun. So I Command Z'd that. In this case, I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to hold the Shift key as I do. And that's going to keep it perfectly proportionate to how it came in. And you can see that I still have width and height markers, which are really useful. So I'm going to bring our width down just sub 2 inches, just something where it's close, but it's not quite. And I'm going to click and drag it over, lock it to center. And then over in Object Info, I'm going to select the center box position so that I'm rotating around that. And I'm going to hit rotation 90, enter, and deselect. And there we are with our Theater UCF logo in there. You can always specifically input measurements if you know. You can also get it close. So like probably like 1.8 inches wide by 1 inch tall would be pretty close to accurate. So then we have our title block. Next, we're going to turn our title block into what is called a symbol. A symbol is a reusable resource within the program. Instead of a whole bunch of individual lines, it converts it into one uniform thing so that we can reuse it on multiple different pages, multiple different design layers, instances, whatever. You can also share and reuse these between files for more convenience. So you don't have to make the title block all over again. You just import the symbol. So to do this, we're going to select all of our title block. I clicked and dragged while holding my mouse button over top of everything, and then I'm going to release my mouse button. You should see now that you have multiple different objects selected through your Object Info palette. We're now going to go to a new menu. We're going to Modify, create symbol. And this new dialog box pops up. For the name, put in title block. For insertion point, you could keep it as the center of your object, or you can establish it as another point on the title block. Since we know that title blocks go on the bottom right hand side of your drawing, I'm going to actually choose next mouse click, and then once we exit this menu, we're going to end up clicking on the new insertion point. For units, world-based. Difference between those is that the size on the paper for the symbol will depend on the layer scale, versus the size of the symbol will ignore the layer scale. Insert in walls, we're going to deselect. We don't need to insert this particular symbol into walls. Under other options, we see we have a checkbox by default that says leave instance in place. This would turn what we have selected straight into that symbol and leave it on our design layer. We're going to leave that checked for now. I tend to turn that off. And in this case, we want to convert to a group. So symbols are reusable, but you have this option when you're creating one to turn it into a group. So symbols, think of them as nested resources. If you change one thing about it, it would change it across your entire document. Well, we have things like page number and the date and the plate title that we don't want to change repeatedly every single time we try to make an adjustment for one particular piece of paper alone. So we want to actually convert it to a group. You can leave the rest of it as default, and I'm going to say OK. And you see I have this little special cursor right now. This is for inserting that insertion point. I'm going to snap to the bottom right corner, and I'm going to click once. Then saying select a destination folder. The default is fine here. You could create a new folder if you want to be extra organized and call it title blocks. Say OK. And now you see that it has converted this into a group. But if I go into my resource manager, I can also see title block right here and double click to select it. And then I can insert it many times over into the drawing. It's all going to look the same.